You're welcome back. This is NewsFile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on NewsFile, we put Ghana first. And this show is brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Jura Plus, where Jura Plus goes, water flows. Star Assurance, your solid partner. Rehoboth Properties, having mosquito spray and coil, pleasant on humans, tough nightmare on insects. And Napa Foods, it's tasty. And as you know, this is our final edition and it's extended. It started at 8 and will end at 1. We have dealt with the management of COVID, that's 2020 in retrospect. And we have dealt with the NDC and its issues with the election, which appear to be very, difficult matters to deal with. And then now we know for sure that they are going to court. Now we are coming to look at the other aspects of the discussion on 2020 in retrospect. We have tabled issues of corruption, press freedom, the economy, security, and jobs, and then market fires. So let's begin with corruption and press freedom, because this is the press reflecting the people to the nation. So it has been a very interesting year, hasn't it been? And it does appear that the matter of Ajapa has dominated the discussion so much. But how did we end it in looking at the issues of corruption? We are being joined by the people who are at the center of monitoring the country's performance as far as corruption is concerned, and also to give us an overview. And then my guests in the studio will also help us to do the discussion. Now, if you don't mind, let me introduce to you Professor GODFRED BOKPIN. Once he's here, you know that the economy and jobs is on top. But let's begin with him and see how much he has followed the issues of corruption. Reviewing the year 2020 in the area of corruption.
Yes, thank you very much, Samson, and good morning to your cherished viewers. Samson, 2016, corruption was a typical issue in this country, and I believe that it played a key role in that election. For all intent and purposes, I thought that was going to be the last time that a subject or an issue like corruption would dominate the public discussion, the run-up to an election. But that didn't happen. So it tells me also that we are not learning, particularly within the political actors. And to a large extent, the MPP has also been punished. If you look at the election outcome also, that you can't dissociate corruption from the way voters responded in terms of our AGM under democracy. So when you look at it from 1992 and the way issues have played out, you can see clearly that right from the Constitution, and I'm not a lawyer, and I think if you analyze all these things, again, you want to understand whether the Constitution as it is now is fit for a purpose in our resolve to deal with corruption. Then you also want to look at the role that election management and funding plays in all this enterprise. And if we are not careful, this is not going to disappear now, because if you look at the way our democracy is highly monetized and commercialized, it's very difficult to actually allow such a corrupt system to elect a leader and afterwards expect honesty and integrity from them. I think it's going to be very difficult. So if we want to address this holistically, we have to look at our election process. We have designed a system that is so corrupt, and we expect that system to produce an honest leader. I think that's like asking fish to climb a tree. If you look at how political parties are funded and the lack of transparency and all of that, and the winner takes all, pay to play along and all of that, there are those who see our election as a business opportunity that they want to invest in, and they would maximize their political returns, which may come at the expense of the larger common good. And that is an issue. Corruption, whether you look at it from the public sector, including politicians making demands, what we call the demand side, or the private sector complying with those demands. Let's call that one the supply side, or maybe or commercial corruption. It's a big issue for us. Given what COVID has done and the limited fiscal space going forward, we cannot entertain corruption in the manner we have done pre-COVID. Then we should forget about it. Then you're also looking at the international dimension to corruption, the role of multinationals and all of that in big-ticket corruptions in Ghana or in Africa broadly. And you realize that we have a big issue on our hand. If you ask me, I will say that let's look at it from the Constitution point of view. And I would suggest that Ghana needs a new constitution altogether that is fit for purpose, that represents our aspirations, where we are heading towards. A lot of things draw inspiration from the Constitution. And then because, in particular, if you look at the way the shape Parliament is taking now, I believe that we can take advantage of this and then see Ghana coming out clearly from this, because I believe that is a message we are getting from this election, particularly from the legislature, the way it's going to look like. Of course, there are issues and all of that, but I believe that regardless of how they are resolved, Parliament will not be like the way we have seen it in the last couple of decades since 1992. And therefore, we should find some kind of hope and then begin to initiate the necessary reforms that actually helps us to address this issue. And then we can tie that in with the political parties funding act and all. That would give us opportunity to ask for greater disclosure and transparency and all of this. Because you see, it's not easy if you look at how much an MP had to spend to win an election. It's so huge. And then when you look at how much they are paid from Parliament within the 4 years, and you actually compare that to the cost of winning that election, then they have to be exceptional to break even. And that adds a lot of pressure to the politicians themselves. Then even when you have spent all of this and won the election, there is a working capital that you have to play along. As an MP, you have to show up at every funeral, naming ceremony, and all of that. It's so huge.
Does the MP's Common Fund they use for that?
I'm not too sure that is enough. I'm not too sure that is enough. So you realize that the way the system has been designed puts a lot of pressure on our politicians as well. And their own regular salary will not be enough to deliver on that expectation. And therefore, all sort of things have to happen. It's not only the politicians. You can also look at the private sector that is also complying with that demand, with those demands from the private sector perspective in terms of buying their way through contract procurement and all of that. Then we have to look at what measures we have to put in place from that dimension as well in addressing all of this. But as it stands now, corruption, we haven't made progress. We haven't made progress. We thought that given the way corruption was discussed and the role it played in the 2016 election, the narrative was going to change a bit, but it hasn't. And I believe that the government as well wasn't that smart in some of the issues that they were pushing through in an election year, like Ejapa and the rest of them.
Right. So, okay. So we'll return and on Ejapa, the Transparency International, the Global Coalition Against Corruption, issued a press statement on the 22nd of December 2020, and it's headed, "Financial institutions in UK urged to review and withdraw from Ghana Gold Royalties deal." So they flagged it, and it does appear Martin Amidu's work is still speaking, and even if the government was intent on going on with Ejapa, then the people who are supposed to patronize it and give us the money have sort of been put on the alert to rather stay away from it.
There's reputational risk now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me get to the our guests who are now joining us on Zoom. We have Kwame ASIEDU still on. We have Professor ANING also on. But joining us are MANASSEH AZURE AWUNI, who is the Best Journalist of the Year 2020 West Africa. I'm sure when I said Best Journalist of the Year, some of you began to ask questions. Right, West African Best Journalist of the Year 2020. You know, he does a lot of things about corruption. So he tells the real stories. He encounters the stories and then exposes the people involved. MANASSEH, thanks for joining us. You are muted. Please unmute. Can I hear you, MANASSEH?
Sorry about that.
Great.
Yes.
All right. And SULEMANA, the media watchers and trainers also have an eye on the issues of corruption as well. SULEMANA BRAIMAH is the executive secretary of the Media Foundation for West Africa. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me, Samson.
Great. MANASSEH, which are your, say, 5 major corruption stories of the year 2020? And what would you say about how they were handled?
Well, in my view, I think I may not be able to name up to 5, but I would want to name 2, which in my view are not typical corruption stories, but they are very important in our journey towards perhaps reducing the rising spate of corruption. And the very first one I would want to mention is the decision to ask Domelevo to go home. I have heard a lot of people talk about the fact that our campaign financing and democratic processes invariably makes or breeds corruption. But I also believe that there are 2 ways that this corruption can be fought. If we ever get an honest and credible leader who is committed to fighting corruption, that would make a great difference, which in my lifetime I'm yet to see. And I was born in 85. The second one also has to do with the institutions of state, because when this Kufuor's corruption, there was a video that was released that somebody provided funds for the campaign and people were questioning and all of that, that people who fund the political parties should never even get into contact with the presidential candidates. I am reading Obama's latest book, Promised Land, and he says he personally had to call people, the big funders, and beg money for his campaign. And these are people who sometimes give in hundreds of millions of dollars. But once he is elected into office, there are institutions that would ensure that he cannot have his way with those who contributed to the financing. And that is where some of us thought that once Daniel Domelevo, the Auditor General, was beginning to make politicians sit up it would continue and inspire other anti-corruption public institutions to also act. Unfortunately, he was asked to go home and spend so much time there. So I think it's one of the biggest corruption issues in this country, not only this year, but perhaps in this decade, because it is not only the act happening or not happening, the very institutions that are set up to fight corruption are being undermined. The second also has to do with Martin Amidu's issue that some of us thought he was going to perhaps revolutionize the fight against corruption in this country. It didn't end well. I will also say this is an old story, but what came out this year also perhaps was so important. And I'm talking about a contract for sale that we're able to trace as much as over 41 million Ghana cedis that went into the account of ABAJ, who is the former PPA CEO. And this is important on a number of grounds, because if you look at the fact that he was put in a position to fight it and he was involved in selling contracts, beyond that, you also have the fact that these monies were paid into his account within a period. We have the Financial Intelligence Center. The banks have anti-corruption regulations and money laundering issues. And if you go to every bank, they are there. There was a time I did a small work for an international media organization. They paid me, let me say, coins as compared to this. And when I went to the bank, I had to explain a lot why that money was getting into my account. So if these huge sums of money are going into a person's account for 2.5 years, and then that account was not flagged, nothing was done about it, then it creates a very serious potential for money laundering and others, because if people can steal money and not be able to hide it or spend it, that in itself can be a disincentive to the theft. Right. So for me, these are some of the three major corruption issues that have caught my attention this year.
Thank you, Manasseh. Hold on there for us. And Manasseh had earlier issued a statement actually commending the president for the swift action in dismissing ABAJ. Right. So let's bring in Bright SOWU. Bright SOWU is head of programs at the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. Bright, tell us about a number of the corruption-related stories that came up in the course of the year and what your coalition feels, how your coalition feels about how these were handled.
Good afternoon to you, Samson, and good afternoon to your listeners and also to the fellow panelists. These are all people whom I know, and I think it's great to have all of them on the show. Great. I think if you look at the year 2020, really, we should talk more about the corruption stories that we're all discussing. Not all of them actually started or even occurred in 2020, but we spent a good part of the year discussing these stories. The Airbus scandal, the PPA boss scandal, Manasseh was just talking about, the Dapa deal, the Kufuor bribery, the 1 million crore case, among others. Now, what I'd like to talk about is how come we still had a number of these corruption cases springing up in 2020, or we have to discuss a number of these cases. Now, in every society, corruption exists. So you expect that, as long as there's a greed of men, there'll be corruption cases to deal with. But how we deal with it is what is the issue. I did notice that you yourself wrote an article on September 12th by Joe Online that talks about the fact that at least on the legal front, our regime is a high-risk regime as far as corruption is concerned. But implementation-wise, it's pretty much a low risk. And that's why you have a number of these cases coming up. These are some of the issues that for us we take on as a coalition. And so we do look at not just the issues. Anyone who fingers any of my appointees as far as corruption is concerned should be ready to produce the evidence. For us, it was not a very necessary statement to make, to emphasize it, because if you look at our laws, really, it's a fundamental thing that the accuser has the onus to produce proof. So if you consider making a statement like this, the only thing it does really is sort of give a lot more energy to your appointees to say, well, whoever says I did ABC should provide a full evidence to support that. And that's also contrary to the spirit of our Whistleblowers Act, Act 720, which essentially encourages citizens to report corruption. The only thing they need there, basically the suspicion and reasonable belief. Gathering evidence is the work of state institutions. It should not be the work of of citizens. Corruption is analogous to other crimes where we give the police tip-offs. If I suspect that there are whistleblowers behind my house, I don't need video evidence or a test of the substance before I can report it to the police. So I feel that stands by the president. Something continues to say that, you produce the evidence. Basically, it's a slap in the face of the anti-corruption fight. And as MANASSEH alluded to, you need both institutions and the leadership to be able to fight corruption effectively. Then, of course, there's the case of the leadership where you can refer to Mr. Domelevo's case. And I don't want to go into the legality of that because that's an issue in court. But it simply breaks a bit of logic that the government that purportedly is interested in the fight against corruption will ask its most outstanding performer to go on leave. Well, when you look at the positive end of the sheet and the numbers do not end up, you simply have to begin to pay attention to conspiracy theories on why these produce or proceed on leave directive had to come about. Then, of course, MANASSEH also mentioned the case with the OSP. If you look at the response that came after Mr. Amido's allegations, I think the response that came eventually only goes to basically slight him on the issue that there was a lot of resources at his disposal, but he was not effective. But the crux of that resignation is the fact that his work on the Japan deal was there was some attempts to basically interfere it, and there's been yet to be a response from the president that's convincing enough that this was not the case. And I'm hoping, and I'm sure the entire anti-corruption fraternity is hoping, that indeed this is one of the issues that make through the crossover on December 31 into the new year, because we need to ask questions about this. That said, I think another important issue going forward, and that's where Mr. Amido also comes in, is that
you have not been satisfied with the explanations from the presidency.
No. I mean, they've hardly said anything
not
to
that,
the substance of
not
the issue,
that the presidency,
or not.
Not that the presidency has not rebutted.
Does not explain that bit away. So that's been highly unsatisfying for me. But another issue I want to look at something going forward is that is the support of the executive something that is required for the OSP to go to function? Because if we go through the trouble of making the office independent and setting it up as independent office, and our first SP is resigning simply because he has no confidence in the presidency, he has no confidence in the executive support him, then do we need to relook at the setup of the office again? Because for anyone who is going to take that office again, these are questions that the probably will have to look at. Did we need, or is there support essential? Because indeed, if you set up an independent office, the hope is that regardless what the presidency is and what their stance is, the office will be able to function.
Okay.
So again, also, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Amido probably is listening. I mean, he's an avid writer. At some point, we need him to give us his take on why the OSP can only function if there's support from the executive, and why any of our government institutions can only function if there's support from the executive. Otherwise, the whole point of leaving at his post does not make a lot of sense to all of us.
So, Bright, you hold on there. I'll return to you and then put your thoughts together. In 2 minutes, you will tell us what your expectations are going into 2021 on how corruption should be fought from the point of view of the leadership, because that's where your emphasis is. Sule, you have followed most of the publications on some of these issues, and in fact, the Media Foundation for West Africa has tried to train investigative journalists and even support them with funding to be able to do and work like MANASSEH is doing as a freelancer. What are the topical corruption issues for you, and what do you say about how they were handled?
Okay. Well, I think that both MANASSEH and Bright have highlighted the critical issues of corruption that came up in the course of the year. For me, I think my focus really is on the enabling environment that needs to be created for the fight against corruption to be real and to be successful. And from all indications, we have not been able to do that. And that is why, for me, the case of Domelevo Martinamidu resigning, and the fact that for 4 years of this administration, we have not seen a prosecution, a successful prosecution of any government official or even the previous administration. Indeed, when you look at the MPP 2016 manifesto, you would find corruption mentioned about 16 times. And in all cases, it's about accusing the previous administration of high corruption and corrupt dealings. And where they even acknowledge that there was some considerable amount of infrastructure work going on, they make the point that all that is tainted in high levels of corruption. And therefore, this administration, if it got power, was going to take all steps to ensure that corruption is dealt with. And we've all seen what has happened. It appears to me that at some point, it was almost a crime for others to even seek to help the government in fighting what it says it would fight. To the extent that some of us said, well, they promised to fight corruption, but in the end, they are actually fighting the corruption fighters. It's not just Domelevo, Martinamidu, and the rest. People like MANASSEH and others who have dedicated themselves to the fight against corruption. We all see the troubles that they go through. And so for me, so far, it's been a failure. I don't think that we've seen any commitment on the part of the government to dealing with the menace. And as I've said, I think that my conviction is at some point, it was almost becoming a crime within this administration to seek to fight corruption. There are
prosecutions ongoing. You don't acknowledge that?
Even though it's the same leader, things may change.
I asked that there are prosecutions ongoing. You don't acknowledge that?
Well, Samson, yes, we know prosecutions are ongoing, but we are very well aware of some of the high-profile issues. Talk about some of the work that MANASSEH had done, the Kroll and Associates issue that Domelevo was bent on prosecuting on the basis of a court decision that said, well, the point about surcharges and those things are things that have to be activated in order to save the public purse and all of that. So yes, we know there are some prosecutions ongoing, but I think that it is quite saintly to pretend that for 4 years with these levels of appointment and all the kinds of contracts that we know government sign and all of that, none of the appointees, no official, committed anything that, could be duly investigated and prosecuted, to the extent that those that even within the public domain, we know are matters and incidents that certainly requires proper investigations and prosecution, ended up getting those who were bent on dealing with those matters being sent home.
Okay. So stay on there for me. Kwame, from where you sit and observing the corruption fight, what do you have to say?
Well, it's been interesting listening to Suleiman, Manasseh and co talk about the respective things that have happened in the previous year. But I want to put it in context. It is known, and it has been said that as a country, we lose about 3 billion every year just to corrupt practices. So are we saying that over the period of the government from 2017 till now, 4 years, the quantum of money that we've lost is not enough to get a single person standing in our law courts answering questions to the state? Are we then trying to say that every single person who has been pointed at when it comes to corruption is squeaky clean to the point that nothing could be found, apart from obviously the PPA and a few others? Is it not true that we even can smell the corruption ourselves? Like it's always said, if it swims like a duck, quacks like a duck, has wings, then it probably is a duck. But here is us being told that, no, that is not a duck. It only looks like a duck. What you see is a chicken or a geese. And as a people, we are believing these things and moving on. Fast forward, Transparency International in the UK then issues a report to say that companies in the UK who had links to the Ejapa deal should really look at themselves. That is an indictment on us, if you ask me. Yeah. The companies here should really look at themselves and their engagement with that particular deal. Yet, here's us being told the thing is squeaky clean. Do I see a duck again? Yes, I do. So for me, it is disingenuous for anyone to say that there has been no corruption over this period. And in this year, things have gone better. So as far as I'm concerned, the first thing is for us to devolve ourselves from our political leanings and how we argue for or against corruption when someone who wears our political color or does not wear our political color is indicted. And the issue comes into the court of public opinion. Because the minute we take political sides, we take entrenched positions. And what I see is that as a result, politically exposed people who are getting their hands dirty are getting away with murder because they know that the bottom line is we would take sides and nothing would happen. And we've got a litany of issues like that in this present administration, where we've all taken sides. Oh, because I'm MPP, there's nothing going on. Because I'm anti-government, there's something going on. But we don't actually say, wait a minute, this is the issue. Should this person be stepping aside? Should we be re-looking at it? Why has it become a subject for public discourse in the first place? Are we willing as a people to be losing all these monies and yet finding no one accountable for the losses we are incurring? I don't think we can continue like that as a country. And for me, these are the big things that we voted against in 2016. The perception of corruption. Because in 2016, you can argue that there were very few people who were in the law courts under the watch of Mohammed. Yes, there were 3 that I know, and eventually, subsequently got jailed under the NPP. But it was the smelling of corruption, the perception that we were seeing a duck that led us to go and vote against that government. What happened then? We see ducks now. They swim clearly in the full glare of our oceans and our waters. And yet we say that, no, now we're seeing geese. We cannot behave that way. If we continue behaving that way as a people, it is not the corruption that is killing us. It's our hypocrisy and our subjectiveness around the question of corruption that is going to sink the country. And unless we change, that's going to happen.
All right. Professor ANING. Hello, Professor ANING.
Yes, hello.
Right. Prof, thank you so very much for your patience. Let's deal with you on this issue and ask a couple of questions about security, and then you can take leave of us. Do you think we are doing enough in fighting corruption, or we did enough in giving a signal that corruption is an enterprise that if anybody got into, they will be in trouble?
Well, thank you very much. Before I speak to these 2 points, let me make a couple of prefatory remarks since I will be leaving. This relates to our previous conversation about the signal that the elections or the results have shown. That signal is not to parliamentarians. That signal about the way we voted sends a clear signal to every single individual who wants to perform and serve in the public political space that it will never, ever be business as usual. That you give us promises, you don't deliver, we will vote you out. The second ancillary to this is that when we vote, in particular ways, you cannot change the result. So the EC must up its game. Now let me come to the corruption. Corruption is a business. And when I listen to all the great speakers before me right now, it raises a couple of questions. And I've always told my graduate students when I teach political corruption, that in Ghana, corruption is the glue that binds our society together. Without corruption, the edifice of, and I'm coming back to you, the edifice of what we call enterprise Ghana will collapse. We tend to presuppose that the kinds of corruption that we are seeing can be dealt with by a certain sense of appealing to people's morals or applying the law haphazardly. This is a multi-billion-dollar business in which its tentacles have not been properly understood. We are not looking at the networks that underpin it. We are not looking at the levels of collusion. We are not looking at the manner in which the rules that ought to apply, first in identifying, investigating, and in prosecutions, are being applied well. So that raises a couple of questions. A, when we talk about corruption, what are we talking about? What are the multiple facets that we are looking at? Because until we understand this acceptability, that corruption is a canker and it's contributing to our inability to live proper lives, then the little corruptions that people are engaged with will say, oh, but this is small corruption. Corruption is corruption. Number two is the need for us to look at the broader levels of collusion and the networks that underpin it. Because corruption cuts across religious beliefs, political affiliation, old school networks, ethnicity. And until we begin to draw the lines and to see what kind of networks underpin these practices and allows it to continue, I think all the fantastic promises that are given will remain only promises.
All right.
The issue also is about public perception. Because KWESI earns 10 cedis a month, but his monthly income or his monthly expenditures are 1,000. And earlier on, we spoke about the expectations of parliamentarians when they go to funerals, but it's all of us. I mean, if you go to funerals in Ghana every weekend, the cost of your fuel, the risk, your donations, the levels of tiredness, and subsequently your ability to deliver on Monday morning raises questions. But we want everybody to be at our funerals, at our weddings, at our outdoors. We want to be seen that we've bought a Maybach. We want to be seen that we are driving in this latest vehicle. What is it in our society that glorifies materialism to such an extent that even when the behavior of individuals and their performance within the public and private space raises questions, we refuse to raise those questions and challenge those.
Right.
So public perception plays a critical role here. And I think until such a time that we begin to challenge the signals that we send about acceptability of corrupt practices across the gamut of our behavior, both in public and in practice, this business will continue and undermine and threaten our survival
Prof,
as a people and as a nation.
Prof, before you leave us, very briefly, tell us of your view of the security situation in the year under review and any advice that you intend to give before you take leave of us.
Well, I think 2020 has been a year of contrast. We started the year January, February with optimism and with hope, as we normally do. The COVID came, And the COVID was one of those situations that brought this nation together, in which the declaration of a national emergency and the securitization of a pandemic and the behavior of the uniformed forces, even when there were a few excesses, actually brought us to cohere that we had an unseen enemy that we needed to respond to. Over time, that trust, that civil-military relations, civil-police relations trust has totally eroded. So getting into 2021, there's a lot of work that we need to do. The fires that we've seen creates and raises particular concerns about the way that we tackle our security situations and how we respond to them, devoid of politics. Because if you look at something, the critical fires that we've seen in Ghana, the old foreign ministry got burnt, our medical stores got burnt, banks have got burnt, the Ghana Revenue Authority building on the Ring Road got burnt. Where are the reports? The late President Rawlings's house got burnt. Where are the reports, and what have we learned from them? And I think very quickly politicizing these fires and diverting critical attention from what the chief fire officer is saying is similar to this corruption fight. Rhetorics that do not touch the technicality. My final 2 points, one relates to the mediation that we've spoken about before. The two political parties entering 2021 must begin a process first of public utterances that seeks to pull us back from the brink. I think the whole nation is unhappy, feels insecure, there's a sense of fear in our societies, and herein lies the role of a mediator who can bring the two parties. Finally, Ghana, something, let me come back to your usage of a particular word that I like. Ghana is the enterprise and its survivability, development, growth, strength, what should drive our engagement, either as private citizens or as public citizens. We have nowhere to go. Most of us don't speak French. We don't know how to swim. The EU doesn't want us. The only place where we can find solace is the geographical space called Ghana. And we are all duty-bound, irrespective of our religion, ethnicity, political coloration, and age, contribute to ensure that this enterprise called Ghana becomes a success. That is our sacred responsibility as Ghanaians. No questions about it.
Thank you very much, Professor KWESI ANING, Dean of the Faculty of Academic Affairs at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your patience. He started right with us at 8 a.m. and has been on all through. Let me get Bright SOWU to also take leave of us by telling us in 2 minutes what his expectations are as to how to deal with corruption issues in 2021.
Comfortable relationship between business. Some have categorized it as political investors and politicians. It's quite a lot to ask people to be hopeful again that we will have an elected leadership that is very concerned about the issue of anti-corruption, actually do a lot in that regard. I think we need to begin to look at our institutions. I'm not just talking about increasing budget. I'm talking about looking at the people who work in there. Every corruption issue that has to happen, some of them have to cite some of the issues. They are aware of some of these issues. They are afraid to report the issues. And we need to begin to look at that. We need to look at the leadership of some of our anti-corruption institutions. What prevents them from being able to effectively doing their work? And I'm going off resource issues. I'm simply talking to the leadership issue and that sense of responsibility. that will put people in positions, particularly anti-corruption positions. They understand the mandate of the office and they have the passion to deliver on the mandate of the office. Whatever the issues are that are preventing them from able to do that, I think civil society, media, we have a responsibility to work with these people and try to understand what the challenges are. Because political leadership will come and go, and they will have different preferences, different styles to approaching corruption. They will have different levels of effectiveness in dealing with this. But the institutions will remain. So that's what I think a lot of our focus needs to be. We need to have a way of getting people in this position to report corruption, getting the institutions that are supposed to investigate to have the resources to do that and be able to carry the cases further forward. I feel like we are only going to be successful in future if we can build that leadership and to build up our men and women and say, look, we've created an environment where you can report these things bravely, knowing that the case will be taken up, knowing that you will not be demoted or be transferred for speaking up or exposing corruption that you cited in your office. I think that's the best way to go to go out there, because the political leadership really, whether it's NDCMP, which are the party that comes to power, that uncomfortable existence with business, with political funders and all of that, creates a situation where it's really becoming too much to ask or to think that we won't effectively deal with this. So let's look at our institutions, let's look at our anti-corruption institutions and see what the challenges are, and then let's support them instead. I think we might have something more worthwhile, coming from that anti-corruption fight. We focus on the institution.
Right. Thank you very much, Bright SOWU, Head of Programs at the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. I hope that you guys will also continue as you have always done, because like you have told us over and again, $3 billion is unaccounted for in this country every year. $3 billion. How that gets unaccounted for, I have no idea. So if we preserve $3 billion for only 2 years, we will not even complain that free SHS is difficult or has a problem. You need how much of that? Just how much of that? And these schools that we can't even build, and we go for loans and we build 20-something and we are not able to finish, and the politicians play games with it. We'll build like thousands of them, and we have no need for them. Dr. Kofi Awochi is now going to have a stake on the question of corruption. And I don't know how you want to take it from, where you want to take it from, but Professor BOKPIN seemed to end on the law, the Constitution, and says we need a completely new document. I have my views, but those are mine. What do you say?
Well, first of all, before I start, let me just say that $3 billion is not a conservative figure. It is more than 10 years ago when the World Bank did that estimate that we lose $3 billion per annum, more than 10 years ago. And at that time, grant corruption wasn't at the scale at which it has probably been in since the last 10 years. And so the $3 billion, I think the economists are here. I'm sure we probably may have gone beyond that. But that's the figure we've had since the last research that was conducted in this particular subject. Professor BOKPIN may have a frustration, but I'm not sure how that can be corrected. Some years ago, I delivered a paper in which I said, Ghana's case appears to be a case of a good constitution in the hands of bad actors. If you have, no matter how perfect a document is, that document invariably will always lag behind human ingenuity. So in the absence of actor will, in the absence of an actor or actors who are determined to implement it, they'll always dance around it. So you can't have a perfect constitution. And that is why calls for constitutional reform should always be strategically placed. So I understand your frustration. I'm just not sure if a revolutionary change of the Constitution will sort of rectify the concerns that you have. And the reason I say this is if you look at the Constitution the way it is, actually there are things in the Constitution which, if properly implemented, will solve a lot of the problems that we have, including SHRAJ, including Parliament, which has a committee that is supposed to check corruption. The Parliamentary Accounts Committee, for example, Public Accounts Committee. including the fact that we subsequently established other statutory agencies like YOCO and the most recent addition of the Office of the Special Prosecutor. There are legal structures that ordinarily should not create this problem. The only problem with the Constitution is that structurally, the Constitution has a main pillar that holds it together. Yeah. And that main pillar appears to be the president. That's where the problem is.
Yes.
And that's why all appointments begin, or virtually all appointments begin and end with the president. Unfortunately, in a country where you have so much patronage, that has constantly been a challenge. So that once the president appoints the key actors, invariably there's always that patronage that continues.
So you see a lot of good things.
Correct.
With just one thing on practically nullifies all the good things.
Correct.
About it.
So the question is, if you know someone who's connected to the president who is involved in corruption, should I touch him, should I not touch him? The police are not sure whether they should arrest or they shouldn't arrest. The Attorney General is himself or herself may not be sure whether to move or not to move. Investigations will wobble, among others. So because of that central role of the president and the influence of patronage, and because it runs through the politics of the parties, everything gets complicated and murky. And this is what brings me to the issue of the real politic. Look, in corruption, everything is our real politic. At the end of the day, and you made a point very well when you stressed the fact that we have built a governance system which is steeped in corruption. Yeah. The governance architecture is structured and frameworked around corruption. And so invariably, the question you ask yourself is, you want to deal with the problem of corruption, all well and good. But assuming you deal with the problem of corruption, are you going to replace the things that corruption used to feed by reason of which the mill run? And if you're not going to replace them, are you ready to deal with stagnation, like everything coming to a close? And that's another problem. And the reason I say this is this. Look, we have campaign financing. The recent campaign that they waged, who paid for it? That's the question you ask yourself. Now, for those who paid for it, and you used a word that I have also always used, investors. I call them investors. They are political investors. These are guys who know the electoral calendar, and who wait for the time to be ripe, and they invest.
Or call them entrepreneurs.
Correct. So if you don't pay, who do you expect to pay? The recent campaign that was waged, they spent a lot of money. So at the end of it all, how do you expect that these people who, let's be honest, are not regular philanthropists like you have in other jurisdictions? They are people who expect a certain return. It's more or less an economic calculus. How do you deal with this? So there's an issue of realpolitik, and that realpolitik dimension of things, let's be honest, we have not been dealing with that. We all just scream, end corruption, stop corruption, etc. But there's a demand and supply angle to corruption. And until you deal with that, you can't stop the menace. Now, this brings me to, again, some other work that was done by the World Bank, by one of their key actors called Kaufman. Kaufman developed a concept called legal corruption. You know, corruption actually apparently can be called legal. It depends on how you look at it. And the legal corruption is what typically it appears the public procurement, especially the PPA, appears to have been embroiled in. I.e., you may have a situation in which something must go through a procurement process. It goes through the procurement process. It goes through all the administrative processes leading to an ultimate public award of contract. But we all know, and people have said this many times, that often before you even see the advertisement in the papers, they've already decided who wins. In other words, there are processes and there are systems for beating the system.
Yeah.
And
the corruption according to the rule.
Exactly. So
the one against the rule.
That's the point. So there's a system, and you identify the system, and you ensure that your corruption is in sync with the system. Now, that is the most difficult corruption to deal with. And the reason it's difficult to deal with is because on the face of it, it is legal. It is perfect. You've complied with all the rules. But underneath, things have gone on which, unfortunately, you will never be able to see because ultimately corruption is consensual. So some of these difficulties one has to deal with. And in the absence of that, you can't really confront the challenge of corruption. Then the question of the unexplained wealth, which I think one of the speakers mentioned. The question is, the question is, how do you deal with that? And I tell you that, look, that appears to be one of our most, one of the areas we probably haven't done well when it comes to enforcement on the rules of corruption and whether or not we have the desire for that, the determination for that. The average person in Ghana, or at least the average person perceived to be corrupt, invariably live beyond their means. I mean, even political. I mean, look at the politicians, the political actors. A good number of the times, the political actors, their salaries are clear. They are members of parliament or they are members of the executive, and their salaries are there for everyone to know. But often, at least on the face of it and perceptually, there appears to be some huge mismatch between income and expenditure or lifestyle. And nobody questions anything. We accept that routinely. Now, when you do that, you incentivize corruption, because what you do is that if I know that no matter my lifestyle, nobody can ask questions, and I'll be accepted for who I am. I mean, people basically just then indulge in acts that you may consider corrupt, so to speak. So I think that the reality is there are some things that we have to deal with in order to deal with the subject of corruption, but just also screaming end corruption without looking at the functional, and I'm putting functional in quotes, but without looking at the functional role of corruption, i.e. corruption appears to be playing a function or a role within our political system and our governance system. Without looking at the functional role and remediating those functional, those spaces that corruption appears to have failed, and replacing them with something that equally works, we may just frankly be playing.
Manasseh AZURE just used one of the investigations he did, which has led to the sacking of the PPA, former PPA boss. And he told a story that we may all be familiar with. As a lawyer, I have had to go to court to ask the court to unfreeze clients' accounts because a small amount of dollars hit the account and the Financial Intelligence Unit, through the banks are the ones supposed to alert them, and they quickly freeze the account. Then you are required to explain how you got that money. The onus is on you. If you can't explain, the money is taken away from you. It belongs to the state. So he tells of Ejenim Boateng Ejei's case, where within that short period, he populates his accounts, which at the time the OSP and the Shraj thing put together, he has some 30-something thousand altogether, Ghana cedis. And then by the time he is busted, he has in excess of 40 million and no bank raised any alarm. Prof. KWESI spoke about that I earn X amount and yet I end up spending more than that. You say the Constitution holds the solutions. Many have said, in the manner we are talking about this, we are talking about the grand corruption, political corruption. Yeah. So how about the Constitution and what it proposes, where your unexplained wealth as a public officer is taken away from you once you have declared your assets, and then subsequently we find. The Constitution says, Article 286, Clause 4, any property or assets acquired by a public officer after the initial declaration required by Clause 1 of this article, and which is not reasonably attributable to income, gifts, loan, inheritance, or any other reasonable source shall be deemed to have been acquired in contravention of this Constitution. Is this not one of the ways to get the politicians involved in the grand corruption and the public, those in public service, involved in the grand corruption to stop?
About a year ago, I made this statement publicly, i.e., that the rules of procedure, or rather the rules of evidence, should be shifted. I don't know whether you remember that.
Yeah.
Should be shifted to, and the burden placed on a person alleged to be corrupt to prove that he's not corrupt. When I said that, I had this provision in mind. A few friends of mine at the bar called me after the program and they were astonished. Some were even scandalized that I could say this, i.e., that we should shift the burden of proof and put it on the person who's been alleged to be corrupt to prove otherwise. The Constitution has all along had the burden of proof specifically shifted only on this particular matter. So for corruption purposes, the state actually doesn't have a problem. The state has been enduring the problem unnecessarily, and the courts have also not been treating it well. for corruption-related causes, when the matter is actually in court, the state is alleged or assumed to have done its work. And so the state says you are corrupt. You are assumed to be corrupt. It is you who has the burden to clear yourself and to discharge that burden by establishing the fact that all the monies that I have, I got them from legitimate means. It is true that it's not going to be easy, especially if you've had money from all kinds of sources over the years. But once you're able to show a semblance of connection between the means that you have and your actual accumulation of whatever it is that you have, you've been able to discharge that burden. Okay. But yes, the Constitution, let nobody be under any illusion. The Constitution has established that. And I think the framers understood that there's one big threat to the Fourth Republic. It is corruption. And the grand political corruption. Correct.
Okay, so something ought to be done because the pillage is such huge. And when I sit with the anti-corruption people and they talk about the deep things of the dark world of corruption, you get really shocked. And the 3 billion that is attributed unexplained, which Abochi talks about, should be far more than what's far more today. Don't think it's just on figure somebody is throwing out there. The people who give us money for development, they are the ones who are able to tell that this is how much that is not explained. So they know it. You are taking from the World Bank, you are taking from all these Bretton Woods institutions, they know it clearly that you are stealing the money rather than using it for what it has to be done. The politicians are spending so much, they are spending what they literally don't have, what they can't earn. And that is a big issue.
We are not even the big recipients of the corruption that we witness here. It exits the country. So in terms of the multiplicative effect, it's not even here.
Right.
They are the big recipients, the developed countries. Look at the offshore.
So we obviously can't exhaust all the issues. Let me quickly get my guys on Zoom to leave us, but this is the way I do it. Manasseh, start with you. Press freedom. In some 2 minutes, what will be your account of press freedom in 2020? Manasseh, unmute.
Yes, the bad narrative hasn't changed. And I'll give a few examples. I set out to produce a documentary on our fight against COVID-19 this year. And a number of medical doctors and nurses told me that they could not speak because of victimization. One actually spoke on camera and mentioned how hostile it is against people who speak up or share the reality. I have met experts who took questions, danced around it, and after the interview said, well, you realized I couldn't speak as I ought to have done. The reason is that you are victimized when you speak your mind. We know how civil society organizations in this country were harassed, their integrity questioned when they dared to speak against Ejapa. I wrote an article 2 days ago on this EC's issue, specifically about Techiman South and the Santro Kofi, Akpafu, Lolobi, and the Likpe issue. And I got a death threat in the form of an email. And the first sentence by this person is that I am lucky to still be alive. And he believes the government has not dealt with some of us enough. And this person goes on to say that anytime I take my pen to write such an article, I should remember what happened to Ahmed Swale and that we will come after you. As to the antecedent of this pronoun we, I don't know which camp this person belongs. But if a journalist can be threatened on live TV and is killed, nothing happens to anybody, almost 2 years on. We still do not have any evidence from the government what the crime of this modern Ghana journalist was that they were arrested, their computers seized and all of that, what they went through, then it stands to reason that somebody somewhere thinks that I don't have the right to make an opinion or say something, and he would say that anytime I take up my pen to write, I should remember what happened to Ahmed Swale, and then they will come after me. This is not something I witnessed when I started journalism 10 years ago.
Okay.
So it is not a narrative that is encouraging to those of us doing critical
journalism. You should report this to the police, have you?
I have sent messages to some of the top people in CID. I intend to report it. Okay. And this is not even the only of such threats.
All right. Manasseh, we have run out of time. Thank you for your time. SULEMANA, same 2 minutes. Press freedom. What do you have to say?
Well, the narrative is not different, as Manasseh has said. I think that we have to look at it from different perspectives, from the political environment to the legal environment, policy environment, as well as the economic environment. And from whichever context you look at it, we are not in good times. Politically, Manasseh has elaborated some of the challenges that journalists continue to face. And it is not surprising that Samson, in the course of this year, I have had a number of journalists either call me or visit me in the office to say that, look, I have done this story, but my news editor or my organization is saying that it cannot go because it is too critical of the government, and we cannot predict what the consequences will be. I think that it is obvious that continuously the state authorities continue to use threats of either withdrawal of advertising, other forms of intimidation to perpetrate this kind of fear and anxiety that journalists are going through in our country. Of course, in the course of the year, we've had close to about 15 separate incidents of attacks against journalists involving up to about 22 individual journalists, most of which we've not seen any actions taken by the state, even though we obviously know that these are crimes that are committed. And of course, in a COVID year, there has been that economic toll on the media as well. And that even makes it much more effective if a government decides that we're going to use money as the thing to intimidate you and so on and so forth. So the environment has not been the best.
I'm sorry, but this is where we have to end it. SULEMANA BRAIMAH, Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. KWAME, unfortunate I'm unable to come back to you, but thank you so much for your patience from 8 a.m. Prof. BOKPIN, we should have some little time for you to be able to tell us on the economic front, how things have panned out. What will be your review in summary?
Yes, Samson, 2020, I would say it's a sad year for us. It has taken us just a year to reverse practically decades of progress that we have made as a country. And when I say so, it's because of the effect of COVID. COVID has really exacerbated the vulnerabilities in our society. And I'm saying this because the long-term economic effect of COVID will probably last a century if we are not careful. And I'm saying this because the economic crisis Germany witnessed in the 1920s, some Germans are still traumatized today when it comes to inflation, even as of 2020. The Great Depression the US encountered still influence the lifestyle of some Americans today when it comes to the attitude towards savings, investment, and all of that. So that tells us that we have to be prudent in terms of the kind of economic recovery policies that we implement 2021 going forward. A bit limited fiscal space. And the reason I'm saying so is that if you look at the gap as typified by COVID-19 in terms of between the rich and the poor, it's going to take us years to close that. And we don't have the fiscal space to be able to do massive infrastructure spending in a manner that can engineer growth. And that's a problem.
Yeah, so the year of roads became, you know, a mirage.
So, and if you look at, so government has a duty, because we have not tamed COVID, of maintaining safety, health-wise, macroeconomic stability, in the face of collapsed revenue envelope and ballooning public debt. That is huge for us. That is huge for us.
Okay. That's a scary picture.
If you look at the data from Ghana Statistical Service, in terms of number of people who have lost their jobs, and they will continue to lose their jobs. There are certain skill sets that are redundant now. Some people who lost their jobs will never get it back. Some businesses that have collapsed will never come back, and all of that. But so if you put all these things together, it tells me that. And if you look at the dynamics of our population, we have more youth, we have more people going through the university and exiting and entering the job market.
Okay.
And the economy is not expanding along the labor-intensive subsectors of the economy. And that will bring me to what kind of policies do we do? We have done more macro-level policies. But I think we have to be deliberate now and have sector-specific policies that create jobs. And to that extent, we need to also look at the system of generating data. Post-COVID, we cannot be talking about the usual GDP growth and all of that. We should be talking about other relevant data that tells us the strength and health of our economy, like quarterly employment data from both private and public sector and all of that.
All right, it's too bad time ran out on us so much. Can we get some 30 seconds of what you have to say about the economy?
Well, I think Prof has said it, but just so I'll just add that the Ghana, in the midst of all this doom and gloom, the Ghana Investment Promotion Center has registered a higher investment inflow for 2020, which is actually supposed to have been one of the highest in years.
Okay.
Now, I think that is one area government may want to look at, particularly given the chaos in Europe and America. We in Africa and Ghana in particular, given how we've handled this, we could probably leverage on that in terms of higher investment attraction. So that coupled together with a more nuanced job creation strategy, probably that could become a little bright spot.
And we have to put the right strategy to make sure when this investment also benefits us.
Thank you all so very much. And I thank you all who joined us today, our audiences who continue to keep faith with us. It's been a year where when your NewsFile, your most authoritative news analysis platform, still has no competition in this country. And we owe that to you. Thank you very much. I'm Samson Ladia Yanini. On behalf of my production team, led by Samuel Dame, Matilda Womega, Emmanuel Ante, and the rest of them. Also, of course, Babu, thank you also very much. David Babu, thank you very much.